Thank you. Besides the recovering engineer, I'm also the co-founder and CEO of Tingono. This is my second AI company. My first one was acquired by Forrester in 2018, so I decided to take the leap again. Okay, in its over 20-year history, CS has undergone a lot of shifts. And overall, it's been a great ride. And that was until the tightening of the monetary policy led to cost cutting across the board. And unfortunately, as we all know, CS was one of the disciplines that was most impacted by it. And it won't be far-fetched to say that maybe 2023 was the year where CS, as we know it, kind of died. So why was that? Well, given the focus on efficient growth, the fundamental question every CEO and importantly CFO was asking was, hey, what we are doing, is it really working? Or said another way, when a CFO asks us that question, what they really mean is that, hey, you CS, how are you impacting the two key metrics for our business, namely NRR and GRR? And what they don't want to hear are vanity metrics like number of QBRs delivered, or NPS score, or my favorite or least favorite, health scores, right? So these things don't really directly tie to revenue outcomes. And unfortunately, a lot of us fall into that trap. So when asked this question, we're not able to really show how we're directly impacting these key metrics for our business. And this inability to demonstrate the impact on revenue has led to a lot of outcomes which many of you might be familiar with in your own work or other places or people you talk to. So one of them is obviously scale down teams. We have seen this. So for example, Twilio, let go of their entire CS team. Now, I don't think that's common, but the cuts have been really deep and far-reaching. The second is dwindling influence. So CS is more and more does not find a seat at the table when it comes to revenue discussion. So we are kind of like pushed into this ancillary role like HR, where when this the business future of the business is decided, we're not invited. And then finally, there's been a lot of finger pointing, and by that what I mean is that in a lot of instances, CS and CS leaders are being blamed for lack of NRR growth. They have to constantly kind of like justify their existence, and also like why companies should be investing resources and money in that. Now, as I was mentioning, you might have experienced that, but another aspect to it is like how do you come out of it? So James has actually experienced this in his own career and has also had really great learnings about how to encounter it, and that he'll share with you.
Thanks, Parry. Appreciate that. So a little bit about myself. I'm at a company called SQUIRE. I'm the Chief Customer Officer there. We service the health and beauty space, primarily SMB, but we have tens of thousands of customers, so very high volume of customers. Prior to that, I was with a company called ServiceTitan, very vertical SaaS-focused company as well, down in LA, focused on customer success there as well. And I think all of us as customer success leaders can notice some of these no-win challenges that we all face. Product shortcomings, we're often in companies where the product doesn't always meet the customer expectations. Maybe it meets some core ones, but there's always something left. The other thing we have is bad fit customers. As we start getting in more constrained economic times, the sales team maybe get a little looser in terms of who they're willing to sell to and how they're willing to sell. And that leads us into some challenges with obviously meeting expectations again. And then thirdly, we often have operational limitations. So what I've seen many times is that the marketing teams, the revenue teams, the development operations teams are getting a lot of operational resources to automate, streamline, and scale the business. But it's more of an afterthought as to how is success getting those same resources in order to scale and build those teams. And so really want to talk through how to overcome some of those challenges. So one of the things I found is super helpful for me is making finance my friend. This is something that sometimes is a little controversial when I talk to CS leaders. Sometimes they see the finance team as a little adversarial, maybe trying to find a way to do more with less, I think we always hear. But I often find that they can be your biggest ally, assuming you're willing to speak their language. And what I found is that NRR is a really effective way, and GRR, by kind of nature, is a really effective way to do that. You can go back to the other slide.
Oh, sorry.
So a couple things about NRR that I think are really important to note for those that haven't used it really extensively before. You often hear it referred to as like NDR, GDR. There's a lot of different ways to frame it, a lot of different ways to think about it, but ultimately there's a few things you can do to really talk to finance in a more effective way. One is saying, look, NRR naturally as the company grows is going to actually go down. The size of the existing customer base is going up, the amount that it can scale will naturally come down. So if I as a CS leader can keep it where it's at, that's ROI that I'm providing to the business. The second is that you're not going to make big swings in NRR. You're not going to say, I'm going to increase it by 10%. You may increase it by 1% or 2%, but minus some sort of big product or big pricing change, you're not going to be able to move it really dramatically. And so this is where also speaking this and setting these expectations with finance is key. And then the third that I found to be super effective is it gives you a seat at the revenue table. It allows you to get into the boardroom. It allows you to have conversations about the future of the business and all the things that I just mentioned, things like pricing strategy, marketing strategy, sales strategy, because you can tie everything back to it and say, this is the financial impact of the decision that other teams are making for the broader business. Not just the CS team, but the entire business. And then you have finance as an ally saying, we want to maximize our ROI. You can tell me how to do that. You're my ally, you're my friend. Tell me what we need to do in order to get that done, and do it in terms of NRR and GRR. So doing this, though, requires a key thing. It requires you to completely own NRR. And this is a really scary thing, I think, for a lot of success leaders, because there are a lot of things that go into NRR that are outside of our control. Like I mentioned, pricing strategy, for example, the products that we're able to sell, and so on. However, if you can set those expectations that it's fairly fixed, that you can only improve it from here, you should feel confident in taking ownership of this number. And all of us are already really owning it, the biggest piece of it, which is GRR, or churn. Right? So we're already owning this. It's a question of putting it in the terms that the finance team is most familiar with, and NRR is a great way to go about doing that. Okay. The second thing that we found to be super helpful is that NRR, making it the outcome for everything that we do in success at SQUIRE has been super helpful. So looking at all the actions that we're taking as our individual team members, our activities, our support cases, how much people are actually investing in help articles, those sorts of things. And looking at NRR is what we're ultimately trying to drive. And what we find when we start doing the modeling of all those activities against NRR as the outcome is that we're able to start determining exactly which activities are adding value to the business and which activities are detracting from the business. And that allows us to then have a very good conversation with the board, with the finance team, as to where we think we should be making more investments and where we think we can pare back. And so this has been super helpful for us to really focus and has been really critical. I think one of the challenges that we face, and this is myself coming from an enterprise customer success world into a scaled, almost completely scaled CS world, is that our CSMs have thousands of customers they're managing. They cannot have the higher level relationships that I grew up with or that I was used to having in an enterprise company. We had to find ways to show this value and to really tie something to a metric or an outcome in the activities that were being done and getting those CSMs focused where they needed to be. And then lastly, the next one, through this process, what we found is really helpful is we've completely ditched anything like a QBR, aside from some of our more strategic accounts or even health scores. We've really focused on dripping value. So we now have a lot more insights in building some of this modeling of exactly which value props matter to the outcomes both for our customers but also for NRR. And we're able to drip those value points to customers as well as to internal stakeholders, which has been super helpful. So with that said, I want to talk a little bit about leveraging AI at SQUIRE. So I think all of us, how many here use a CSP currently, or a customer success platform? Okay. I think all of us can agree that they do certain things very well, and they're very much structured around a CSM, having conversations with customers, taking notes, ingesting that information. For us, we had a challenge, obviously. We can't talk to thousands of customers and take notes and have those types of interactions. We needed to automate a lot more of that, and I think a lot of those learnings have come through, but it really forced me to look at a lot of the CSPs and realize they don't really fit that model well. They're really built around kind of a CSM's outbound motion, And what I needed to build, or what we've needed to build at SQUIRE, has been a motion that is outbound system-wise, like the system's outbounding, and then the CSM is more reactive in terms of which interactions are eliciting a response, which interactions are concerning, and which interactions actually need the CSM's time and attention to be spent on that account. So with that said, we spent a lot of time doing modeling as well, but one of the challenges we had was our data was messy, as everyone's data is messy. And when I started doing this process, I was doing it from the standpoint of we need to get our data perfect. But then I ran into Tingono and found that they had found a way to do this with very messy data. So, taking data that wasn't well structured, that didn't have the right relationships, and were able to get me a lot more insights than I was able to do outside of that. And so, with that said, I want to turn it over to Parry to walk us through, what we've built at SQUIRE.
Thanks, James. So AI has been a game changer for CS. So we all know it helps us increase our productivity, but also it's helping us really directly impact NRR. And it all starts with predictions. So by continually learning from SQUIRE's data, Tingono can now predict months in advance which customer, for example, is likely to churn and why. So, and then using that, SQUIRE has leveraged it in multiple ways. Number one is prioritization. So out of the hundreds of accounts, which, actually thousands of accounts, which SQUIRE CSM manages, they can now really focus on the ones which Tingono has identified as risks. And secondly, by linking outcomes a customer really values to what is driving churn for them, it helps them, again, focus on, okay, this is the particular issue I need to solve for this customer. So here's an example. For example, for this customer, we identified a couple of issues. So the first one is, they had a concern about how quickly their tickets are being solved, so which would have caused them to churn. So for that, what SQUIRE team did was not only prioritized fixing of these tickets, but also like every time a ticket is logged, a prompt response from the CSM saying like, we heard you, we see it, this is what we are doing for it. So again, like an excellent customer service and experience, all through AI. Now, the second issue was that this customer was struggling with this particular product functionality within SQUIRE's platform. So now, reaching out to customers, so how would you actually solve this, right? You will go ahead and say like, okay, let me train you on it, or let me give you this knowledge base article, or what have you, right? But, reaching out to hundreds of customers out of thousands, again, even with a templated approach, is very difficult. So for that, SQUIRE actually leverages the generative AI capabilities within our platform, so which actually crafts this personalized custom message automatically. So for example, here is a sample email. It talks about the value the customer will get by using this feature, and then also pulls a knowledge-based, kind of helpful article from their knowledge hub. So, which then like CSM can quickly review, make some edits, maybe add a personal note, and then send it over. So this mix of AI and human, touch lets an individual CSM actually manage thousands of accounts and manage them really effectively. And then in the sense that now they're focusing on what a customer really needs, instead of, let's say, what they were doing traditionally is like trying to drive adoption for all the bells and whistles in your product. Customer really doesn't need that. They buy it for a particular reason, and if you can really figure that out and provide it to them, there is a win. And the win in terms of customer experience, win in terms of productivity. And then the Tingono's AI functionality, it just goes beyond predicting churn. It is equally applicable to when you're trying to figure out, if the customer will drive value from a higher package, for example. Or is there, the outcomes they're looking for could be achieved through, cross-selling them a new product entirely. So all this is, comes together, and it helps you really boost, again, your NRR, which is also, at the end of the day, reducing churn and increasing expansion. So, but what about the customers who are neither at risk for churn or a potential for expansion, right? So we can't ignore them. We have to, all great CSMs know, we have to be proactive at letting them know about the value they're getting from our offering. And for that, there's this functionality we leverage. It's called value metrics update. So based on, again, everything is outcome driven, right? So based on what this customer values and the outcomes they care about, Tingono creates these personalized messages that you can then drip to your customer, right? Like again, very specific. So this has proven to be very effective again for SQUIRE. So instead of sending a broad generic email to everyone, now they can send like these specific messages. And then what happens is then a lot of times, because of this, CSM role kind of shifts to what James was mentioning earlier, much more like monitoring things, right? Like so a lot of times a customer would respond back and say, thank you for these insights. They're great, so no action required. So instead of now firefighting or figuring out what I should do, CSMs can be truly a partner with the customer when they need it. So, I have always believed, and I think that was kind of like a sense of our, conversation as well, that, no technology, regardless of how cool it is, would be useful until you can really demonstrate the impact. And like we've been talking about, the impact for us is, in terms of revenue. And for that, I'll let James handle that as well.
Thanks, Parry. So yeah, let's talk about the outcomes we got from it. I think they're pretty impressive. We were able to get to 85% prediction accuracy of churn, for example, with a 6-month lead time. So we were able to see, which customers are going to be leaving us, most likely within about 6 months, and we were able to predict that with good enough accuracy to take action on it. So that was very impressive for us. And we have been able to get ourselves like kind of into the 75-80% range with the product data that we had, but what we couldn't do was get the lead time. We kind of knew they were leaving, but we knew they were leaving as they were heading out the door. And I think that's something I've seen myself have challenges with at a lot of different companies that I've worked with. The kind of the financial number there is we got a 4% boost in our GRR. So this isn't a 4 percentage point boost, like 4% increase. It's actually 4% of our entire ARR base that we now have back. So a huge ARR boost from being able to get in front of customers, have those conversations in advance, making sure if there was just a misunderstanding that we were having that conversation, but also realizing up front, like we may be losing this account and better forecasting that loss that's going to happen. So being able to go to finance and others and say, hey, here is going to be our churn number, here is going to be our GRR number well in advance so that we can plan for it and there's not a lot of surprises. And then lastly, really we saw an increase in CSQLs. So not just looking at, this customer is spending this much money, we think they might be a capability for the next package, but actually looking at their engagement and usage of the product to say, yeah, they're kind of small, but they seem to be a power user. And so we're going to potentially sell them the next level of product or service or an add-on product. We were able to increase our CSQLs by about 19%. So again, it was very helpful for us in terms of finding ways to do more with less. And I know we've been talking a lot about how AI can be helpful. Listening to some of the other sessions about how it can write an email for us, have these interactions with customers. But I think the other area that's not spoken to as much is how we can actually use it to see the future a little bit, and also how we can drive towards outcomes that matter to the business. And so really appreciate you taking that time.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, no, thank you. We're happy to answer any questions that cropped up.
I think there's a Slido slide we're going to need.
I don't know.
No, he's taken control over there.
Okay.
Get Slido up so we can get some Q&A. While we're getting that going, does anyone have a question you just want to shout out?
Yeah, sure.
Hmm?
You talked about connecting with finance. And
Yeah.
I'm wondering about the kind of the relationship between you, sales, marketing, and finance.
Yeah.
As though you were people at a play, how would you be relating to one another? How did the relationship work out? How did sales feel about your connecting more with finance? If we were to just turn this into people and characters, how would that work?
Yeah, I think that, if you want to have a seat at the revenue table, you're going to have to take a seat at the revenue table, and that's going to require potentially having conversations with individuals that may not always be in the normal chain of command. But I think that it's really important as a CS leader to have those relationships with finance, because if you don't have those relationships with finance, others do, and those relationships can can impact you. And so I think it's very important to make sure you're having those conversations and building those relationships. It doesn't have to be the CFO, but it could be a finance business partner or whoever it may be, to make sure that like what matters to the business right now, how am I aligning with that, and what metrics are you caring about right now? And for our business at least, NRR is next to new ARR in terms of the value it brings to our shareholders.
And also, in my previous role, I used to run a P&L at a fairly large company. And at the end of the day, like I had CS, I had sales, so it was entirety of it. But for me, it was like when I was going to present to the board, it was that's what we were discussing. We were discussing numbers. We were discussing other metrics are important, but eventually everything boils down to numbers. So I would always appreciate when my leaders would come to me and say, we have talked to each other. This is what we have come up with, and this is what you think you should present. That was very helpful to me as well, from that perspective.
Yeah, I think if you're in a situation, maybe to directly answer it, where you're reporting into, say, a CRO or some other kind of revenue leader, I think that leader at the end of their day, assuming they're focused on revenue, is the whole business, and you're able to speak in terms of NRR, $1 from an existing customer is the same value as $1 from a new customer, and it usually costs a heck of a lot less to acquire as well as to retain. And so, if they're thinking logically and you're able to make that argument, they should be doing that. And generally what I've seen is if the CFO or others don't see that leader thinking about it logically, they will help bring that alignment into the picture to make sure that we're looking at $1 as $1.
I'll take the first one. How does it integrate with our systems? So we have customers who kind of span the gamut. So in a lot of times we will directly integrate with your traditional enterprise apps like Salesforce, Marketo, Pendo, what have you. And then in a lot of instances, companies have actually consolidated that data into a Snowflake instance, like a data warehouse, where they're already running BI tools, so we can integrate with that too. So typically it's very quick. It takes a couple of days to get up and running, so that's not a challenge.
How do you identify that a customer is too far gone and you shouldn't spend additional time on them? Yeah, good question. I think that the benefit. So when I was an enterprise go-to-market, there was never a customer you could lose. If you lost that key account, that might be your job next week. So you had to give everything to that customer. I think this role that I'm in now, with focusing on SMB and really on scaled success, gives you a bit more freedom to say, look, I'm not going to win every at-bat. I'm taking a lot of at-bats, I'm taking risks. Some customers are going to leave, some customers are going to stay. And I think the data can actually, in this case, give you a little more objective view of how likely this customer is to churn, and can I solve those factors? Maybe they're product issues, maybe they're other issues that I just can't, we're just never going to see eye to eye. Or maybe those are relational issues that I think are much more easy to swab over. I think there's definitely some subjectivity there in terms of determining if a customer's too far gone, but I do think that, you have to be aware as a CS leader of how big the account is and how strategic it is to the business.
Yeah, and I'll completely agree, and I'll just add that, obviously, for the purpose of presentation, we were focusing on an individual customer, explaining that. But then there's always a way where you could move up and look at a cohort of customers. And then you can say, for this particular cohort, maybe the challenge here is our product falls short, and which we've seen across the board, it happens, and that's why we can't really effectively serve them. And at that point in time, it becomes a business decision, more or less. Because right now, a lot of times what happens is we'll go and say that, but then, where's the data to back it up, right? Product would say, no, the product is fine. Show me the data, right? So, in that time, if you can prove it with data, then it's a business decision. Then it is do we invest here more, or do we, maybe let this customer segment go, right? That's a clear choice. A lot of business make that, but we have to back it up. So, that's one way to address it as well.
Okay, besides the email drips, what are other examples of drip communication? So we've got emails, but one of the key ways we do it is in product. So we built a modal inside our product that allows us to show kind of banners that drip down. A lot of our customers, and this is a nice thing we have, is a lot of them are on mobile devices. They prefer to use mobile devices. They're not at a computer. We have it on the PC, but it doesn't get as good of adoption as we see on the mobile devices. And so we'll do just the push notifications, just like you get on an Uber app or somebody, the driver's coming close, be ready. We'll drip a value that they've seen. They've seen an increase in bookings of 10% over the last week, or they've not received 10 phone calls that they would have expected to receive if they hadn't, and we'll drip that value either on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, depending on the cadences that we want to set up. So that's a lot of partnership with the product team.
How would you see this playing out for enterprise customers? So yes, so we have customers who span basically the spectrum. SQUIRE is CSM managing thousands of customers. We have Particle, who is much more enterprise motion on that side. So again, I keep on thinking, even for enterprise customers, it's not that you're going to be sitting outside your enterprise customer's office all day, right? It's not there's so many stakeholders there. And then also really think about all the times you're trying to set up a QBR or EBR and how many times the executive actually shows up. They don't, right? It's a little bit, we have to realize we are a vendor at the end of the day, and it is what it is. And I personally think but if you're able to find out what exactly moves the needle for this particular account, the process is the same, then you can focus on those things and deliver that particular value to that particular stakeholder. And then, you can then spend time in delivering that value, building that relationship, which again, transcends just okay, I found this, let me send it to you. I'll walk you through 50 things in a QBR, for example. I don't know, James, you had something to add?
No, I think that, just to get through them all here,
Yeah.
How effective are churn metrics for informing long-term CSM strategy? I think that churn metrics are certainly helpful to informing where the CSM should spend their time. I'm not sure it should be their strategy. I think their strategy should be to increase adoption and drive all the things that we know that the CSMs are there to do. In fact, I'd like them to spend a lot of their time working on upsell opportunities and other things to grow the business. But I do think it helps them decide which of the couple thousand customers that they're managing they should probably be thinking, what's the AR of this account? Can I realistically save them? What are the challenges facing that account? And do I engage or do I not? And make those kind of hard decisions quickly. I think that's what it aids them in.
Yeah.
And then the last one,
yeah.
I can speak to.
So what variables go into a prediction model? So again, if you take a step back and you think as a consumer, when we buy things for different reasons, right? Somebody's price sensitive, somebody buys it because they need it for a particular thing, or somebody just buys it for vanity. I think the B2B world is not that dissimilar. So, but basically when we segment, and we've historically segmented in okay, these are high-paying customers, these are low-paying customers, and we've done that because technology hasn't allowed us to really come to a segment of one. So where we can say for a customer in this industry who consumes my marketing material this way, has logged these many support tickets and this, a massive multivariate analysis sort of, where we can then say this customer values this particular thing. So that's a long way of saying that looking through the entire customer journey is the best way to do it, because then you can say things oh, this customer who is located in Atlanta, it has this behavior, and since they're logging these many issues, this is what I should fix for them, versus someone else who's maybe located in New Jersey, and that doesn't apply to them. So it really allows you to get to this segment of one if you look through the entire customer journey. And AI can do that automatically. We humans, we can't. We can't think for more than 5 variables, I think, in your head at the same time.
Another question I get asked that's around this is which variables are the strongest indicators, because I think we're all looking for those key things that we could intervene with. For us, we started off with just ingesting all of our product usage data. Just everything we could get from the product team, just throw it in. Clean, unclean, whatever it would be, we're just going to throw it in the model and see what we get. And that was fairly good. What we found to be kind of the next level up is we think about what are the outcomes that we already know our customers might receive that are positive from our system. For us, we came up with about 100 different things across, asked all the CSMs and what are outcomes, metrics that you think our customers would care about that you've ever talked about. And we compiled all those together, gave them to the product team, said we need these metrics in our data warehouse, and then we linked to that. So now we're not just looking at the usage of the system, but we're looking at outcomes that we believe our customers care about, and we're then tying those to say, hey, health is based on the outcomes our customers are receiving, and can we model that?
All right, let's thank
Great.
All right, thank you.